Yadim. Good morning, everybody. My name's Terri Janke. I'm a Wurathi, Meriam and Yardakana woman. I live in Sydney on Bidjigal country, and today I'd like to pay my respects to Whadjuk Noongar people and acknowledge country and pay my respects to elders past and present. Shout out to all the First Nations people in the audience and to everyone, hello. Today we have a panel which is going to talk about the convergence of cultural IP and Western innovation. Indigenous people have lived in Australia and interacted with country, land, sea and sky for millennia. Over this period, First Nations people have developed knowledge systems which have been nurtured and handed down through the generations. Indigenous cultural and intellectual property is Indigenous people's rights to their heritage, to their knowledge and cultural expression, including art, story, land management practices, knowledge of place, seasonal knowledge, and nutritional and healing properties of plants and animals. Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, or ICIP or ICIP, is an important cultural asset. There is an opportunity for economic outcomes, and there are many ways that ICIP can be applied innovatively. But it must be done in a respectful way, not like past failures, where there was taking without asking, without attribution, and without benefit sharing. So for First Nations entrepreneurs and innovators, sharing knowledge means an opportunity, but it also comes with risks. There are international rights, like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. But domestically, there are gaps in the law, gaps in the protection of intellectual property, access and benefit sharing, and in light of these absences, First Nations people need to develop their own business models, and today the panel will talk about how they've been doing that. Whilst there are moves towards new laws, this gap is still significant, and protocols, practices, and using contracts has been a way forward. My work, True Tracks, the Indigenous cultural and intellectual property principles, is a framework for people to follow when innovating with ICIP, when collaborating with Indigenous people. So this is encouraging people to respect the ancient traditions of Indigenous knowledge and also seek consent, benefit share, and think about the long-term continuing cultures. But our panellists have been at the forefront of this space. So let's hear from their experiences. First up, I wanted to go to you, Oral. There's been increasing interest in Indigenous cultural products, whether it be Indigenous entrepreneurs or innovating and working in collaboration. What are the opportunities and the challenges that you have seen in your work?
Well, there are plenty. Lots and lots of challenges and an equal amount of opportunity that still is a long way off even being discovered. So the opportunity for greenfield innovation and discovery of products and enterprises is vast for Aboriginal people and Indigenous peoples globally. So here in Australia, one of the biggest barriers is access to capital and investment that is away from government. Government has an interest and certainly funds many things that Aboriginal people are involved in, but it's a different model, is a different compliance and a different strategy that's needed. So that's to do with the access to capability and capacity building that is really important. But I think there's no shortage of knowledge in the Aboriginal community and in Aboriginal families and individuals around the country, and I think globally for that matter. The challenge is how do we, what is cultural? What is culture and what is cultural? Because if the minute that we identify or determine that a product or a service or an opportunity has cultural relevance or value, we immediately must also put in place cultural protocols for behaviour, for thinking and developing new ideas and new products. So, many people actually don't understand the full extent of, this word that is determined through, English, the issue of heritage. So cultural heritage, includes native plants, the biodiversity, if you like, and many of those ecological systems. So, the challenges of how we capitalise on opportunities in nature, and the previous panel were talking about natural capital accounting and determining value for nature. Well, this is something that Aboriginal people have absolutely known very clearly in our kinship laws, our dreaming stories, our songlines, and our cultural protocols and values of law, LORE and LAW. So this is an opportunity for engagement, I think, in ways that Aboriginal people, through, you mentioned the ICIP and the free and prior, informed consent, are really important principles when engaging Aboriginal people as business partners and pursuing business opportunities through, cultural products. So there's lots and lots of complexity in that, absolutely, because it changes and shifts, from region to region. So that's another level of complexity. But I think in all, there's massive opportunity for growth. And we've been listening to, the agricultural sector speaking of innovation, speaking of sustainability and issues regarding, frameworks, whether it's ESG or natural capital or biodiversity and carbon credits. These are really important frameworks in bringing Aboriginal people to the table to participate in the real economy, because there's a historical thing there which I won't go into, but it's time that Aboriginal people had an opportunity and a right to sit at the table and bring value that we certainly know exists.
Absolutely. If you look at the Australian bush foods industry, the participation of First Nations people is estimated to be very low, around 2%. There are models that can enable First Nations people to be greater involved. So thank you for that. I'll go to you next. Darryl, can you tell us about the Rainstick and the innovation that you've done with bringing your ancestors' knowledge together with Western innovation?
Yeah, so Rainstick, we're aiming to mimic the effect of lightning and thunderstorms to stimulate biology. In the case of we're treating seeds, to make them grow bigger and faster and more sustainably. So that variable electric fields we apply in the air actually turn on and off biological switches in the plants. So when we worked on this, the Marawali people, we believe, are probably the first people on the planet 40,000 years ago using our chugara, which is our Rainstick, to influence the system. So a lot of people, we're in the kind of WA grain belt, and a lot of people don't know there was a huge grain belt, a First Nations grain belt, kind of in central Queensland and most of Australia. And we used to dance and use our ceremony using our chugara to influence the system to bring in thunderstorms. They knew how important that was to get yield out of the grain. So that tradition lasted quite a while, and the last known rainmaker was documented in 1921 when the Bullashire Mayor had to call him back to do another ceremony to stop the rain because he brought in floods. And a lot of people don't recognise that, they think Indigenous culture is back there and not used. It was documented that the pastoralists in those days were actually utilising that influence of the system. But unfortunately, one historian wrote that the Marawali people were shot like dogs. So we were cleansed, and unfortunately my great-grandmother was, who we found is the last person who come from that area, probably the size of Tasmania, got taken in as a maid/slave at 4 years old. So she, she grew up, my grandmother and my great-uncles, and it wasn't really safe to acknowledge that tradition. So luckily we were able to go back on country over the last decade and really reclaim that history. If I could have that rainmaking ability of that last rainmaker, I wouldn't be standing here in a startup. It would be very popular in Australia, agriculture. So what I know, and I've spent a bit of time in technology, and we've made a modern-day Rainstick with our tech, and we've been having some very interesting results that were stimulating that biology. So, yeah, that's where that was at.
Good, thank you for that. I'll ask you later about how you set up ISIP models, but to you, Amanda, congratulations on the launch of the collection and your 10 years of Kirrikin. And thank you also for my outfit. I'm dressed by Kirrikin today. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you about your journey because the Australian fashion industry has been embracing Indigenous designers, Indigenous arts, and your journey started 10 years ago. What was it like, and how did you position yourself to, deal with cultural IP, intellectual property, and how has the industry responded, and how have consumers responded?
Yeah, thanks, Terri. So first off, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk owners here who have kept this beautiful country safe for us for many, many generations. I'm actually a Wanneroo woman, which is from the east coast, but I've spent most of my life here. And Kirrikin was born because there was a huge gap in the market around 2010. I actually have always worked in the mining industry and branched out into fashion in 2014 after complaining about how little there was available that was actually authentically Aboriginal and had an authentic connection to Aboriginal people. So I guess, and very early on, the intent was just to fill that gap and find out which way we could do that. But it rapidly became obvious to me that the sheer scale, beauty and knowledge of our artists and the stories they tell were incredible. So very quickly we pivoted and turned it into a social enterprise. And we went to the Arts Council of Australia at that time to understand how you would use a usage agreement. And I think I must have spoken to you about 9 years ago about this, Terri. And Terri, of course, is now the expert on Indigenous IP and has put plenty of frameworks around it. But for me, it was really important to see if we could help our artists become firstly recognised, but secondly have some sort of sustainable income, which I'm still working on, by the way. We'd love to be getting them sheep stations each year, but it's just not possible. The fashion industry in Australia, I don't think is quite ready yet. The market isn't quite understanding what we're trying to do and the stories we tell. To a broader market. There is definitely an interest in the fashion industry, and we're seeing an explosion of Indigenous designers, Indigenous artists, Indigenous fashion and Indigenous, I guess, apparel, T-shirts, all sorts of things, telling all sorts of stories, which is just absolutely incredible to see, and gives me a real feeling in my heart about watching how many of our young people are coming through, developing these skills, finding a place in that marketplace. But we compete with, I guess, and no disrespect to these retailers, but we compete to big retailers who sell $4 T-shirts. So if you're selling a T-shirt that might be, selling for $90 because of the cultural, the stories that they tell and the beauty of the artwork, it's hard. It's hard in the broader market to do that. I think in the next 5 years we'll start to see a change as we start to talk about sustainability, working more in our own country, working with our own products. So this collection, as I just said, has locally sourced wools, cottons and viscose, printed locally, local stories. It's evocative of the colours of the Noongar colours, the colours of Western Australia, and particularly the southwest of Western Australia. And we're sort of hoping that people get that soon, but I still think we've got a bit of a way to go. But I'm still loving seeing the growth and development of the young ones.
Yep. And is there much appropriation, I know, in the fashion industry, the copying of traditional designs all over the world has been a big issue. Do we still see that, or
absolutely? And how do we how do we stop that? And I think it's only the industry that can start to tell the story and say, you know, hold on, fair go. The people who should be benefiting from that work is the artists rather than some big, and most of them, by the way, that are appropriating are very large international companies, probably owned in Europe or America. So the profits are all going back there. We'd much rather see them here in our own country for our own people. And I don't know what the answer to that is unless we start talking very seriously to the industry. And we don't have, as Oral was saying at the moment, until people start to listen and understand the impact of what they're doing, it's going to take a bit of time. And we'll have to yell a bit, yell and scream, I think, a bit about it, yeah?
Good. Oh, it's good to see First Nations fashion designers like yourself giving people like me something to wear and also the world. John, Spinifex craft beers infused with native plants and ingredients. How did you come up with that idea?
Yeah, I didn't. I've got a really good mate, Michael Little, who's Noongar through his mum, Yamaji through his dad. He met with myself and Steve Jansen, three mates, and basically said, why doesn't somebody put Spinifex in beer? Get it talking about, I think it was around the time we were all reading Dark Emu. He said, why doesn't someone put Spinifex in beer? And I basically said, because it tastes like rubbish. But the reality was that, you know, great name for a brewery, but. So, and I'm an amateur botanist, amateur cook. I'm a conscientious amateur at life. I eat too much, I drink too much. I try to make a difference. And so I said, I can make beer. So we made a few beers. I got some wattle seed from the Rowlands community down south. They had some wattle seed growing there, and we roasted it and we put it in an amber ale. We put some lemon myrtle that was being grown down in Denmark, down that way, Lowlands, and we put that in just a nice light golden ale. We sent it to London and we won 2 awards, which was like, okay, well that's cool. So Mick always said, okay, so this is cool, this is working, but we need to put some other things in and we need to create some sort of legacy. And he's all about trying to build some sort of a farming supply chain, develop a supply chain that was local, Aboriginal in the southwest, but also attracting things from the Kimberley and the Pilbara and wherever we could get it, we would get the product from Indigenous growers. And then work on processing and downstream processing. So the idea is that the supply chain is self-sustaining, and it's not just primary industry, so there's value add at the end, so that instead of just making an Oral was saying earlier today, what about a wattle seed and a coffee? Well, you know, that's really cool, but it's also opportunities for other things too. So it's then having the primary producer who generally wouldn't make any money as a primary producer, because I was a farmer as a kid and we were the last to get paid and the least to get paid. So it would then be value add in the supply chain, so you could have, whether you made a mayonnaise or you made a coffee or you made something else that had a native ingredient that was grown in its region and processed and produced by the original owners of the country, that would be really cool. So they would have the product. So I've developed a few of those, and really we're just really waiting for the farm to grow, for that to happen. When it comes to IP and things like that, I rely entirely on Mick and his relatives with regards to the cultural approval of it. And now I've got Oral to talk to as well, so I'm going to be having a lot of fun trying to figure all those things out and make it work, if it can work. So we put Geraldton wax and honey myrtle and different wattle seeds. I put gubbinge from out of Broome into a non-alcoholic functional ginger beer, which goes really well. So that's getting a local Mama Belungan group. That's Neil Gower up in Broome. He produces that product and we help getting the processing, and I've been working with Deepherd and a bunch of other people to try and get better processing locally on country so they don't have to send the stuff to Victoria. So that'd be handy. So from my point of view, it's a business model. We make really cool beer with unique Australian products, and aiming mostly to be Western Australian, to give that unique flavour that is just us. I had a bloke say to me once when he was drinking my ginger beer, he said, "Mate, this tastes like a walk through the bush after a spring rain." Because the gelatin wax just gives that. And if you're West Australian and you walk through the bush after a spring rain, you go, "Yep, I get it." So that's where we're at. Yeah, and I'm an amateur botanist because my dad was head ranger at Janke Park for a long, long time. And I used to walk through the bush after him, chewing on bits of stuff. And I've got an interesting collection of flavours in my head that pop up at the most inappropriate times. So, yeah, that's me. And we're trying to make a difference. Yeah, I'll use a cliche, one beer at a time.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that difference and the difference between just conventional business models and what business models develop around the use of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property and bringing it to market. And Oral, off the back of what John said and the work that you've done in bush foods and building models that build capability of communities, what sort of things are you thinking about to build sustainable First Nations businesses that can take part in industry?
Building, reliable and viable supply chains is a critical part of, this business sector, and it's no different for Aboriginal people. So we have as Aboriginal people, as Indigenous First Nations peoples, we have access to significant lands. So the knowledge is important. The products are vast. There are absolutely a whole array of products that can be determined and fused with European or contemporary products to create these wonderful new food and beverage and other medicines, drinks for medicinal purposes and so on, rubs and go on. It goes on and on. So the work that we've been doing with the NLE, we spent the first probably 4 years, and the Noongar Landholder Enterprise group is a membership-based grower group. Essentially, it's the only Aboriginal First Nations grower group in Australia, and we've been around since about 2014. We launched in 2018 because it took. We wanted to really get clear and the ethical behaviour around our cultural principles and protocols and laws to do with looking after country, managing land, managing new businesses, learning about developing business models that were appropriate. So our mantra for the NLE is really culturally appropriate, doing things that are culturally appropriate, but commercially focused and driven. So we certainly, are not about extracting or exploiting our cultural knowledge. Much of our sacred knowledge is simply that, it's sacred, and a lot of time that means very secret. So there are things that, and some of the stuff that, just meeting Darryl today, this knowledge, it's fascinating. I'm really keen to hear how his business model works and the service and the capability that you're developing in a technical sense, I think is unbelievable. And I think that's this fusion of new and old is just a massive opportunity for collaboration. The innovation absolutely can come out of a 65,000-year-old practice and knowledge base. So how do we do that? It lives in our plants, it lives in the land itself. Knowing country and bringing sacred knowledge about the land and the landscape is something I believe that farmers and agricultural industry groups and peoples really should be engaging more with us. And I think there's going to be a bit of a wake-up around the compliance and the reporting requirements for ESG. It's about managing the environment, managing the social aspects, and of course managing the governance and how business decisions are being made. So participation, with Aboriginal people has so many aspects to it. The bush foods industry and the bush medicines industry is something that our peoples have been utilising and honing and holding that knowledge for so long. How do we use it in a commercial sense is really up to, I guess, that entrepreneurial mindset and the innovation and the willingness to respect mutual benefits and the sharing of what we create and how we commercialise it. Because there's a lot of stuff there that just can't be done, but I think finding ways, and innovators like, my three colleagues here, and of course, in Noongar country here, there are now 500 new businesses that have started in the time that the Noongar Chamber, which I sit on that board as well, that has proliferated to, from 20 to now over 500. So there are lots and lots of entrepreneurs, there are lots and lots of young people and old people learning about how to develop business ideas and concepts, and then of course putting structure and capability to it to contribute to the economy that we're all a part of.
Thank you. Now, Darryl, you've been thinking about this with your model, with the ancient wisdom that you've used to innovate. How has that influenced your business structure and your systems?
Yeah, I guess we're classified as a deep tech company and deep tech startup, so we need to raise venture capital to probably over multiple rounds to get to commercialise our technology. We're a moonshot. I think we need moonshots with the current system, with a variable climate right now. I don't think the incremental changes are going to allow us to produce sustainable food, and it's a big food security issue. So we've had to go on a bit of a journey. We've just raised our pre-seed round, and what we've had to do is go through a process involving your team, Terri, to help us recognise our Indigenous cultural IP. We've set up a Marawali Foundation, and we've set up a special class of shares, so every round we go through, that equity will stay there for the Marawali Foundation. We've put in safeguards that I might not be in the company. We might do really, really well, and some corporate takes it and it benefits agriculture to allow more sustainable food. But the safeguards in there to ensure they're abiding by those duties and respecting that traditional knowledge. And there's a safeguard that Marawali people can step away from that and take that recognition of that cultural heritage away if there's not an agreement. So that's been a bit of an education process that I've had to go through, and then educate our investors. They haven't seen that before. We've kind of targeted, I guess, ag tech and impact investors who kind of believe in this kind of model and believe in the opportunity of what this traditional knowledge can do. And I guess we're a little bit of a different system where I read a book by a guy called Tyson Yunkaporta called Sand Talks, and it's really around looking at this as a living knowledge system. There's plenty of evidence in Aboriginal people trading and changing their tools and their system. When we had trade with PNG in Indonesia, we adopted those. When the settlers come in, we change that. So it's a living knowledge system, and we keep changing with the current tools.
Very good. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, and in a straight transaction, when you're dealing with investors, often people want to own all the IP, and if it's based on Indigenous knowledge, which should always be owned and controlled and nurtured by First Nations people, that cannot always be given to people in a commercial transaction. So making people, that investors, people that you interact with, understand that and negotiate licenses or understand that it's always there for First Nations people to be developing and nurturing is important. So we see that in the arts, Amanda, with that happening. And how has cultural protocols played out with, arts development? And are we strong in that now?
So I guess there's a range of, artists and types of artists that I work with. We shy away from telling really traditional, deep stories. We'll tell the stories of, for example, the bush or bush foods or, storms in the Pilbara, for example. That beautiful piece of art that you've got on now is Overland Sigh. So we haven't really delved into the very deep cultural stuff. And I would be a little bit shy of that. I think very early on, one of the lessons I learnt is we were using an artist from a very remote part of the country who was absolutely adamant that his artwork didn't go on certain bits of clothing and didn't cover certain bits of the body. So, you know, you have to respect that. These days I work with artists who are prepared to work with us. So it's sort of one of those evolving things. But cultural protocols are always in foremost of our mind. I work with a lot of particularly Noongar people, and they all understand their stories and where they come from and what they're permitted to say and what language they can use and what language we can use in terms of promoting our products. Which has been, you know, like a fantastic lesson for somebody like me who came from, as Darryl was just saying, from a community that was almost completely decimated. So it's a constant learning for me as well. And I used to think I knew something about Indigenous knowledge, but I've come to realise the more I know, the less I know. You know, it's very interesting. But we are working very much in the space of trying to promote not just our products, but all the Indigenous designers. We work with them, and each of them have their own cultural protocols and where they fit and why they would like to do things certain ways. And I love that. I think there's nothing better than that, than these kids. I say kids because everyone's a kid to me, but these kids are understanding from a very young age what their responsibilities are to their culture and to preserve that stuff, and you can't get enough of that.
Very good. John, commercially, getting partnerships or getting people to back you when you talk about the work you do and the nature of Indigenous IP and all of your business models, do you find that people understand that and there is a willingness to embrace that, or do you come across challenges with explaining that to people?
I find it difficult to understand. To get investors to buy in, it's more about telling a story about, and I suppose not a story, but creating a vision that is developing an ethical supply chain. IP for native botanicals, it's a rabbit hole I've tried to go down, and I find it very, very difficult. We've got a lot of problems. I'll just use a plant. Western Australia, my favourite plant, Geraldton wax. There is more commercial Geraldton wax grown in Israel than there is in Western Australia in the cut flower market, thanks to some learned people in universities in Western Australia. Now that's really, really unfortunate. I suppose that maybe I'm just unsophisticated, but I think if you build something that has value, that does work, that is ethical, with your heart in the right place, and you can protect it as best you can, and then build products that are translatable to everybody, then you've got a chance of doing something, because you need money to do it. I'm also I've been working with the guys from Winjan down in Pinjarra, who are looking to get some significant tracts of land to rehabilitate. It's a bit degraded, and they're talking about putting on native plants on it. And I've been talking to them about, instead of just random planting, plant it so it can be harvested, so that it can then be, it'll be used, it'll be looked after, it won't be destroyed, so it will regrow every year. There will then be a creation of carbon credits if we use the correct plants. Those guys can then develop products out of some of those that can then value add and build income into their community business that will hopefully supply me for my business, because I'm sick and tired of going out in the bush and cutting 5 tonne of Geraldton wax. I'm past that. So it's an opportunity, and Mick leads me with that, saying about the legacy and making a difference, and now talking to Oral, we need to make sure that it has a true cultural sensitivity so that it does work from a from a true cultural sense. So we're not just window dressing. And it is about, to me, there are things that need to develop community, and it's employment, gainful employment, respect for your culture and your community, and an ability to make a good living and be proud of what you're doing. I've used the analogy about you get guys up in the Pilbara who are busily digging stuff out of the ground and shipping it off to China, and then at night wringing their hands because they're actually destroying their country, which is a real problem. So I'd like to think that I can be part of the problem. Mick guides me and his uncles guide me on the decisions we make. I don't make a product out of something that is seen to be insensitive. So that's our aim. I think these things are... We have the most biodiverse place in the whole of the planet in the southwest of Western Australia. The stuff that we grow is unique and amazing, and the flavours are just exquisite. And the opportunities to make truly unique products that could showcase where we live and to me, improve the lot of a whole community that have been downtrodden for a long, long time is a good thing. I'll leave you with a little saying that is, what is legacy? Old men planting trees under whose shade they will never sit. So that's kind of mine and Mick's and Steve's ethos, to leave the place better and try and fix some of the things, the wrongs of the past. Yeah. IP, I really don't know. It's very complex, isn't it?
Thank you. Now, you've all expressed to me when I talk to you about your businesses that your goal was to make a difference. A lot of it. Yes, there is the pursuit of, the economic outcomes, but you're making a difference. How do you see that in your work, Oral? And do you find that they're worrying that people may copy? Once you build these models and you take it, if there's a new food that you're bringing to market, and you've got all of this worked out with, people growing, Aboriginal communities growing, and you've thought about the protocols and all the different things. What is the exposure to, other people copying and not doing it? Because at the moment we have no laws. Have you looked at things like geographical indications? What is the weighing it up that you're thinking about in telling the story and sharing the knowledge? How do you weigh up that, and you're looking at measures like geographical indications?
It comes back to, I think, that whole process. I mean, if you're developing a business, the best businesses and the really good businesses, are around for a long time, right? So the best business models are the ones that obviously achieve that goal of sustainability in whatever sense. So for us, I just think that, our contribution to an economy that has been here for such a long time and yet has been changed. So when we consider, the practice of this agricultural industry that's been, going on in the wheat belt alone, there's 98% of clearing of the biodiversity. So the opportunity to restore that, and we know that, whether it's the interest in the carbon credits or whether it's the interest in the restoration or the natural capital, the important thing is that we have to look after country. And I think that Aboriginal values and traditional owner and custodian values and cultural ways of seeing nature, seeing the world, seeing country is such a critical piece for all non-Aboriginal people to actually grasp and understand. So, I think the idea of extracting or copying or exploiting, our knowledges, if it's for country, I think, let's have the more people caring for country in a cultural way, the more we've got, the better, because it's going to take all of us. We've got a massive problem on our hands with just the biodiversity breakdown issue. So the ecological systems are on the brink of collapsing. Science is telling us that, So we can't keep taking from the land and thinking that we're going to build sustainable models for food security or business, sustainability. So let's bring Aboriginal wisdom into the conversation. Let's show respect for what Noongar and Aboriginal people in this country here have known forever, because it does contribute a significant element of the piece that I think is missing when I look at these new frameworks and these new models that are being touted, around the place. So cultural knowledge is critical. Utilising cultural knowledge for the full purpose of restoring country, that doesn't mean we absolutely need food production, and we need better food production systems and practices and models. So, I guess asking an audience like this, particularly, the primary producers, what role does Aboriginal people play on your farm or in your business model is a really important question to ask yourself, and then to find ways where the knowledges that are here and everywhere in Aboriginal communities and families, where it fits. Because I think the opportunity to grow new ideas, to re-establish the old ways, but in new models for I guess, the world that we live in today, because it is a different world. So we have to collaborate, we have to work strongly in ways of mutual respect and care, and we absolutely have to commit to country in a cultural way that says country first. So let's look after the soil, let's look after the biodiversity and the ecological landscapes. The issue of water and wind and how we transition out of the practices of the last 190 years into the new world, I think, is the challenge that is going to be confronting every single person in this room in some way or another. So we have to do it together, I think, is the important way. And exploitation, well, let's try not to exploit. Let's respect and let's acknowledge that people who are different can actually contribute something really unique if we can find the right
So spend
place.
a lot of time on that education and awareness, understanding those First Nations principles, and let it filter through the industry. That's good.
Yep.
And yes.
Good point.
Thank you. And Darryl, you're at the heart of AI and tech. And I remember you telling a story recently to us about the Datathon up in the Cape that you were working with Aboriginal rangers, and they were working with AI and the coming together of that knowledge. Are you able to share that story with us? Because I think it's really exciting, the opportunity that we use ancient wisdom, collaborations, but we are now in the age of AI and digital tech, automation, and how that might play out. Can you tell us your story there?
Yeah, for sure. So before I fell into startups, I spent a decade in construction working all over Northern Australia and lots of communities. I saw a lot of mismanagement and a lot of things that weren't done very well. And as I kind of went in the startup journey and learned about technology, and I went, hey, there's so much opportunity here. And started to know quite a few people who are doing a lot of environmental tech all through the Great Barrier Reef and national parks and managing country. And I guess we went, hey, you're missing out on a really key element here. So we created this event called the Indigenous Australia Datathon. It's been running for 3 years. I'll give you an example of how this is a huge opportunity, not only for land management, I feel, and for agriculture. So Kawanyama is a small community up in Cape York, and got onto their ranger group and said, hey, you need to send some of you guys down. So we sent down this young fella, Brandon, who was 18. He turned up and went, oh, there's a room full of AI experts who've been creating models, and he was a little bit freaked out. It's like, I think I've come to the wrong thing. So we've kind of come up with the formula to make a really safe space. And normally when technologists or people got ideas, like to fill that space. So we went, no, you just need to zip it and be quiet for a bit and build some trust and respect. And Brandon probably didn't do that crash out at school, wasn't necessary, but he knew how to use a phone. So we trained him on how to use a no-code, low-code system. We've got 98,000 photos off a chopper that was exuding a lot of erosion going out into the Great Barrier Reef, causing lots of issues. And we had other experts who were doing the modeling on that, and we taught him how to code that. And he stayed there till 10 o'clock at night. What he brought, which was inherent in him, is just how everything's interconnected. He's just in his genes and genetics that he knows that interconnectivity of that wasn't his land, but he had that. And that's what I guess the other people who were creating up models were missing. And they were quite blown away around how he looked at it and added it, and we trained a model and presented an opportunity. So that's just an example of where we're trying to break down the digital divide for these ranger groups who spend a lot of work on managing country and giving them the tools, because and learning how they can utilize these tools to make a difference. And that knowledge of that interconnectedness and how they manage that sustainable aspect, I think, has a huge opportunity for agriculture as we go forward to address the climate variability.
Very good. I can see so many shifts with, and the young people engaging with even ancient knowledge, the transfer and the intergenerational transfer of knowledge between elders and young people is often enhanced with tech, because some of the Indigenous communities I work in, with their transfer of knowledge, I think we get the kids to come on country and learn things. They're all on their mobile phones. But if we can get them to interact with tech and stuff like that, it's really enhanced that transfer of intergenerational knowledge. So that's a good example.
I think also, Terri, so just on that,
Yeah,
engaging, the tech is fine, but and they do, but they already do that whether they live in the cities or the towns. The one thing, and I've worked for many years with youth and disengaged individuals, and the biggest shift that I've ever seen is when young people, whether they're Aboriginal or not, engage in nature and their own spiritual capability, if you like. So once they connect their spirit to the land and to nature, whether it's the trees or the river or the rocks or the landscape that they're sitting on, it transforms their mindset and their ways of seeing the world. And that's such an important thing, because so many kids and people, not just kids, but people living in the big cities, I mean, this place is just growing, exponentially, and there are fewer and fewer people out in the wheat belt or out in the regional and remote areas. And yet, the issue of mental health and holistic well-being is also, it's going up in a negative way when we should be, increasing it in a positive way. So country is really important. Country is medicine in a cultural sense. So, engaging people not just in technology, but bringing technological understandings and capabilities to engage in the spiritual aspects of the land and nature is where I think these partnerships, and the work that I think we're all doing creates a massive opportunity.
Being on country is important. Yes, Darryl.
It's a great point. So young Brandon was very shy, and he basically got up and pitched how he created this AI model and a way of managing country in front of 150 people. Never done that before, because he was connected to that and could see how his skills can actually make a difference. And then since then, we've kind of put him on a few training programs to help him kind of develop a digital strategy for the Kawanyama Rangers to assist them on managing their land, but partnering with people who are then open to that and evolving that input, and then encouraging them around all those partners to respect that Indigenous cultural IP and how they can manage their country.
Good, thanks. Do you have any comments on this line, Amanda? I know you.
No, one thing too, if I can relate it to artwork, that constantly amazes me is when you see an artist who can paint a bird's eye picture of their country, and you line that up against a drone picture. Now, this artist has never been in a helicopter or a plane, or doesn't, but the picture of both is exactly the same. They understand their country so deeply. They can tell you how the waterways interact, how, where the rock formations are, where it's just a phenomenal experience for me to see that. And it actually, I think it's almost a physical shock when you see that connection, so deeply connected to country, that they can translate that into a piece of art on a canvas or whatever. It's just a phenomenal thing. I've never heard of anyone being able to do that before, but you see that particularly, in the more traditional areas. It's just beyond amazing. And Should we ever lose that? I don't think so.
Hopefully not.
Now, before we go to you, John, I'm going to take questions. So if you're wanting to ask a question, please use the Slido to put in your question. But John, I think what we're talking about here is sort of country-centred innovation, isn't it? Sort of being on country and the role of that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, from a cynical business point of view, it sells. It really does, and I think marrying it together is a very sound idea. I mean, it's a plug for a product, when I've got a Kakadu Plum Gubbinge infused ginger beer that's low in sugar. Now, it's good. It's not alcoholic. It's great. Tastes nice. It's got all those lovely redeeming qualities. But everybody just falls in love with the backstory, that we've got a group of Indigenous growers and harvesters in the Kimberley getting the product, and we're helping them process it and get it. And that's all hard work, but we're trying to help and make that work so that their business flourish, our business flourish. And the other part is that in the model we have, it's if someone makes another product, then we'll piggyback that out into Singapore or wherever we're selling, so that there's exposure. And I think then, for me, everyone then, it's a win. And it's about looking after each other and looking after the country. If we don't look after it, we got nothing. I mean, I'm just a simple farm boy, and if we didn't look after the swamp, nothing grew. If you didn't do that, if you didn't look after the bush, you couldn't go out and, you know, if it was struggling, you couldn't go out and catch game. So I grew up eating kangaroos and rabbits. We sold the pigs. So, you know, it's just quite simple model. It makes sense. If you look after something, and if you look after the people that want to look after the country, everything's going to work. I suppose it sounds magnanimous, but it just is what it is.
Yeah, it's that principle in Indigenous law. If you look after country, it'll look after you. Thank you,
And most
everybody.
farmers understand that. Most farmers know that you can't butcher the country because you won't be there in 5 years. I know full well that, you know, the Indigenous Australians have been here for, some people suggest, 130,000 years. They obviously did a damn good job. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in this place if you didn't know how to make it look after you.
Good.
So,
Great.
yeah.
Okay, panel, I've got the first questions coming in. So here's the first one. How can we support more First Nations people who have such strong connection to land get involved with starting up startups in ag tech? I'll go to you. Darryl first.
Yeah, I sit on the board of a company, a not-for-profit called Empower, and that's aimed to teach schoolgirls, university and entrepreneurs, mainly around bush foods, and giving them the skills and running them through little startup programs to ensure, to give them an opportunity of actually taking that further and going back to their elders and country and reflecting on how they can go and create a startup. And also providing the opportunity that their perspective is, and to go and get a skill set to work in STEM or anything else, can have a really key part in working in ag tech or any other food industry. So yeah, I think it's education to show the opportunity is really a key first step to enable that and show some support.
Good, thank you. Any other takers on that question?
I think the Ranger model that's been developed over the last 20 years has developed, you know, outstanding experience but capabilities, and demonstrated, you know, ways where, you know, Aboriginal people from and young people particularly from remote areas use technology, you know, drones and, you know, even their iPhones or their, you know, their electronic devices to in real time, and they utilise it in ways that it's about caring for country. So, you know, it's almost, as I said from the beginning, I don't think it's capped in any way. It's how do we engage people? Well, you engage them in their interests, and if their interests, not all Aboriginal kids are, you know, that driven by cultural issues. They're actually very much engaged in contemporary, you know, the contemporary world, and technology is a big part of that world. So it's creating ways where we engage the thinking of culture and the thinking of and the capability of technology and new ways of seeing, you themselves and country and culture. So it's it works, and there's a lot of it going on all over the place. So it's not new.
Thank you. I'll move to a next question. What can be done by government and industry to support Indigenous growers and the community?
Can I chime in?
John, you go for that.
Be realistic in funding. We have funding models that virtually, there is a sad statistic that lots of Aboriginal businesses fail. So any Aboriginal business that's coming in, or an entrepreneur with an idea who's got a good idea, is already hamstrung by statistics that says it's 4 times more likely to fail than another. That's not because the idea is bad. It's often because the system is in place, set up almost to make them fail. So there needs to be a different, less brutal regime, I think, but more supportive too, because we might also have people who are less sophisticated, who've come into trying to do business with all the right reasons and all the drive and all the facility and all the capacity to achieve, but they can't get the amount of funding they need. And so they're almost bound to fail. So there needs to be either a more generous and more inclusive funding model, I think, for some of these things. I've seen it in a number of occasions when it is. So when we first started our business, the Spinifex Brewery, it was a 51% Indigenous business. And when we were looking for funding, it was, you got black eyes from doors being slammed in our face because of that statistic. Didn't matter it was a great idea, didn't matter we had all the opportunities and won a few awards and all that stuff. It was basically that it was a inbuilt, entrenched, I'd say, bias. That's my point of view.
I don't think any one of us here would disagree with that either.
No.
We've all seen it.
So it is unfortunate. Yeah.
The Indigenous estate is a big barrier. So the Indigenous estate by 2030 will be 65% of the Australian landmass in size. So there's an enormous, the majority of Australia is actually in the hands and held in trust, unfortunately, for Aboriginal people. So the work that I'm involved in and the work that a lot of Aboriginal people across the country is freeing up that Indigenous estate, because we unfortunately just don't enjoy the same freedoms in a free enterprising world that other landholders and landowners enjoy, and that's a serious issue with Aboriginal people entering, the agricultural sector or the pastoral or the horticultural and any other food production or primary producer industry or enterprise. So there's serious issues, probably more for government, but for Aboriginal people, I think we absolutely have been agriculturalists and farmers and scientists and engineers and all of those for forever in this country. So it's encouraging those relationships to be fully respectful of the fact that in my view, whitefellas don't know everything, but we can actually contribute to the things that they do and the things that they absolutely know with the stuff that we absolutely know too.
Cool. Okay, here's a question for you, Amanda, if you'd like to have a go at this first. How can one reconcile community knowledge IP with an individual's business idea and their individual IP?
Ooh, that's a hard one.
It is.
I guess that what I would suggest, I guess, is that you actually engage with an Indigenous person and understand that what you're doing is actually appropriate in the first place. Look to the local elders to understand what they want and believe should happen, and also engage, actually actively try to work with them and work with them not necessarily in a Oh, sorry, my poor old brain's gone blank here. But, you know, you don't necessarily have to form a business with them, but that would be preferable. I think include them in your business. There's actually so many great ideas. Indigenous people that I work with are incredibly creative and come up with solutions to problems in ways that are, you know, you don't normally see. So I think it would be well worth thinking about doing a joint venture of some type or into business partnership.
Yeah. Well, very well handled, and I think the cultural protocols and that navigating of, you know, always connecting with the community and making a difference is an important way that we as First Nations people in business do what we do. So thank you very much, and please join me in thanking the panel.